Hi, I'm Brett, and today we've got a video update on an MY94 model Subaru Impreza WRX. Now these are cars that are now getting quite old. They're still very popular here in Australia because we're lucky we don't have a rust problem like we do overseas in the salty conditions of North America and Europe. And these cars are actually still quite popular for younger generation people on their P plates. As a fantastic entry-level car for a Subaru WRX. And what we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes is some of the tips and traps of what you should be aware of if you're looking for one of these cars. This car in particular has been coming to us for over 15 years from a maintenance point of view. It's in incredibly good condition and the owner is going to keep it for a long time to come. It's a middle-aged gentleman who just loves his early model WRXs and at the moment sees no need to upgrade to the latest model. So let's have a look at the individual parts and the strengths and weaknesses and why he's made some changes, and then we'll drop the car down and we'll look at the engine bay and talk about the parts from the front as well. So you can see it's got a complete MRT exhaust system which has been on the car for probably over 10 years. And it's got one of the very, very early white line bars which in those days were painted blue, and it's replaced the rear sway bar mount, which is a weakness on these models where they crack around the bracket here that bolts to the chassis. With a heavy duty white line one, and the rear sway bar links on this model is a plastic extruded part which stretch and squash, and the bushes over a period of time can become distorted. So of course in the last few years he's replaced that as well. Now on the rear end of these cars you'll notice sometimes you might see there's oil dripping down or smear around the back of the diff because they do have a breather at the top, so if you're driving the car hard you may see some oil around the drive shaft outputs and things like that, but that's generally, unless it's dripping off the bottom of the diff, these diffs tend to last for quite a long time. The rear suspension on these models really didn't change for an awfully long time with the lateral links. You can get a replacement kit on these parts which are adjustable. One thing to have a close look at if you're looking at one of these is these particular cam bolt adjuster for rear suspension toe tend to seize and lock up over a period of time. Whiteline do a replacement kit for this where you put an adjustable arm in and lock that component off. So that's a little tip to look for when you're looking for improving your car. Now of course we go forward, the MRT exhaust has got a resonator in the centre to take the drone out of it. But one thing you will notice, we've got a cover over the back of the transmission because we've taken the extension housing off the back of the gearbox which has got the transfer case in it. The transfer case takes the drive from the back of the box, converts it to the rear tail shaft, and then it goes back through the gearbox and out to the front diff. Now these particular models around this age now start getting very tight transfer case bearings, and we have pulled that part off to replace the bearings, but whilst it was apart we checked the centre viscous limited slip diff, which is now virtually impossible to replace as a factory Subaru part, and the helical gears and the spider gears in that transfer case diff assembly were quite loose, so we're in the middle of getting them having a bit of a birthday because they were quite noisy. The selector shaft which comes off the top of the gear shift, which is that part there, that connects to the gear stick. There's a shaft that goes in and out of the back of the box, so if you've got a bit of an oil leak out the back of that you'll probably find it's the O-ring on that shaft assembly where it goes into the box that's leaking oil, which is another thing to be aware of. So around the front you'll see here the MRT exhaust system, which is 3-inch all the way to the front. This particular client's put an aftermarket rear temperature sensor in it. High flow catalytic converter that goes up into the back of the turbo. But what you will notice is he's already replaced the rear lower suspension joint. Now this is an anti-lift kit, Bush from Whiteline. It changes the pivot point up and down and in and out. It gives a little bit of extra caster to make the car turn in better. It changes the pivot on the back of the arm here, which changes the anti-dive, anti-lift geometry in the front of the suspension. But one particular thing is this particular joint factory standard is a hydraulic filled bush. And a lot of people look at these bushes factory standard and think, oh, the car's got a bit of an oil leak. But in actual fact, the car doesn't have an oil leak, it's the bush that has an oil leak. And when the bush collapses, the hydraulic fluid comes out of the bush and it drips off the bottom here. So if you've got a damp bush, chances are the hydraulic factory bush inside is flogged out and needs to be replaced, and you can replace these from Whiteline for a urethane part that effectively gives you a performance improvement from handling, but effectively will last forever. The early model WRXs had alloy front control arms, even if it was a STI or a non-STI model. The later models had a steel front control arm, so this one's got alloy. I'll get my cameraman to come around the front, because similar to the rear sway bar, the front sway bar he's upgraded, and you'll notice it's a different colour. It's now silver because all the new parts from Whiteline are silver, but he's replaced the front suspension sway bar pickup point with the aftermarket alloy one, because the factory plastic one again deteriorated over time. Now you'll notice this car doesn't have a modified set of exhaust manifolds. It's got the original factory manifold. On these very early cars, this manifold here is probably the best exhaust manifold made on the EJ20 and the EJ25 engines, and I highly encourage you to be discouraged from changing your exhaust manifolds on these early model Subaru WRXs with extractors, because this factory cast manifold is a very, very good manifold, flows incredibly well and gives really good torque. Up the side here, another thing to look for, which you can't see, but up there is a flexible joint that connects the up pipe to the underside of the turbo inlet. There's a flexible joint in there which moves and contracts with engine heat. They can start to deteriorate and leak, and of course all these heat shields over a period of time can sometimes cause really annoying rattles. So I'll get my other technician to go around and let the car down as we're talking about the suspension. Now this particular car, he's finally upgraded his front and rear shock absorbers. The WRX has got McPherson struts in the front and Chapman struts in the back, and you'll notice he's replaced them with a MCA Blue. Keep going down, Charlie. With the MCA Blue, has got an adjustable hub on the bottom for ride height, adjustable spring platform here for the spring height, and it's also got preset camber adjusters in the bottom, and it's got all the brackets and everything that fit with the original factory sway bar fittings for the hub assembly, but most importantly the brake lines bolt on nice and neat and you don't have to stuff around with that. So let's talk about the engine. While we're touching on suspension, MCA Blue and MCA Red come with fully adjustable front strut tops and rear strut tops, and you can of course adjust the shock rate through the top adjuster, and the camber is adjusted here as well on a graduated scale. Now one particular thing was very unique about the early model WRXs from 94 through till 96, they then changed to a different intercooler, and then they changed from 99 onwards. You'll notice it's got a very, very small intercooler, and it's got the classic chimney taking scooped air from the bonnet scoop to feed air to the turbo, which they then later done away with on later models against the scoop. That's actually got a fine gauze filter in it, so the air is directed out of the bonnet scoop onto the intercooler. So these intercoolers are pretty restrictive in the old day, but one thing I want to particularly show you is the inlet pipe on the turbo doesn't come through under the front of the inlet manifold. It comes down the back of the inlet manifold through a 90-degree bend into the compressor housing into the turbo. And it's got this tiny little blow-off valve that then connects to a plastic welded joint onto the plastic compressor hose between the intercooler and the turbo outlet here. Now these parts here are very brittle with the age of the car, and they can quite easily break off, so be careful about that, because these hoses, which are rubber, go hard over a period of time. And then this hose here, which connects the blow-off valve to the pressure hose on between the intercooler and the turbo, also tend to break off. So if you're changing any of this, be very, very careful. You'll notice he's replaced the air resonance plenum chamber with an MRT aftermarket part, and typically the factory standard car's got a plastic chamber here just to reduce intake drone. Massive factory fitted airflow meter sensor into the original factory box, and you notice this car doesn't even have ABS. That's how early a model it is. All this area here is pretty standard of this model. There's not a lot of other improvements to do. The boost control system is all over here on the side. Pretty good boost control system, factory standard on this particular model. The downside is the factory ECU can't be tuned or reflashed. It wasn't until the MY94 model that allowed that to be tuned using EcuteK software only. So let's get back and talk about the engine. You can see he's already replaced the radiator header tank with an MRT aftermarket one, which we actually don't make these anymore. The factory ones are a pressed steel band connection between the bottom and the top, and they tend to leak over a period of time. So if you're looking at a car, keep your eye on the factory part there. The header tank for the power steering, over a period of time, they got some O-rings underneath it, so you can pull that off and replace the O-ring, because typically that may be leaking as well now. The rest of the parts, such as the alternator and the air conditioning compressor, are in pretty good condition and last virtually forever. And of course inside here you've got the original factory timing belt and all the pulleys. Now one thing on these particular models, they have a Bakelite pulley, which is a very brittle plastic top and bottom pulley. They don't have variable cam control. That is something you need to be very careful of if you are changing the pulley, the timing belt on this particular car. When you lock the timing pulleys in position to change the belt, it's very, very easy to chip a tooth on those pulleys and shatter them. And also you may find if you pull it apart, it may have been previously damaged or it's got a hairline crack in it. Other components you need to be aware of is camshaft position sensor. These days tend to be a little bit flaky as far as reliability. Down the bottom you can't see it, there's a crank position sensor which is right in underneath here. But more than likely one of the common things on this particular model, and it's very hard and it's right down inside underneath the inlet manifold, is a knock sensor. Now the knock sensor is bolted to the block and it's a microphone for engine pinging or knocking, and they over a period of time do fail, and it's something that you want to make sure it's securely bolted in position. There was a tendency in the past to actually put a rubber washer or a fibre washer under the knock sensor to reduce the sensitivity, which actually gives the engine a little bit more performance. The downside is it'll ping more before the ECU will reduce ignition timing. The downside is it's a bit more rugged on the engine from engine knock, and the ECU can't do its job properly. But if you want a cheats way to make the car go a little bit better and you really don't care about what you do to your engine, that was a trick that was done over 10 years ago. Other than that, the front of the car, it's pretty standard. The headlights are all pretty much the same all the way up until the bug-eye model. The bonnet scoop, you'll see, is a little bit different shape to the previous models. They have vents down here. Some people do take these covers off, which make the vents work a little bit better. But one thing you just got to be aware of, if it rains really hard or you're washing your car, you end up with a lot more water in your engine. Particularly this one, you can get a lot more water over the top of the airflow meter sensor and some of these other electronics. Let's have a look inside the car. So this particular model, some of them come with a factory fitted Nardi steering wheel. The interior still for its age is in incredibly good condition. Had remote mirrors, and actually if in this particular model had fold back mirrors as well, because it was the derivative of the original Japanese factory sold car in Japan, and 90% of Japanese cars have fold back mirrors because of the tight conditions they typically drive their cars in. And of course you'll notice there's no airbag, there's no factory fitted airbag, and 5-speed transmission with the early model gearbox and ratios, which was pretty standard, with open diffs in the front and the rear and a viscous diff in the centre. So there you have it, 1994 Subaru Impreza WRX. What you need to look for, if you can find one in good condition, they're a bit of a bargain. The brakes on this model, same diameter all the way up until around, I think it was around 2000 model, and you'll notice if we quickly go around the other side, the calipers are actually a sliding caliper, not a 4-piston caliper, which the STI model in 99-2000 had. But there's still a fairly big brake caliper. The rotor diameter is not quite as big as the 99-2000 model, but still front and back ventilated discs front and back, and really good performance for a car of its age. So of course, if you want any more information about your Subaru, Mazda, Mitsubishi or any other particular car, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. I'll load some still photos of this car to a link at the bottom of this video channel on our Facebook page, and make some comments here because we'd love to hear back from you wherever you are in the world. I'm Brett Middleton. Thanks for watching.